All right, let's get started. First of all, thank you for joining today. If it's your morning, afternoon, evening, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. We hope you participate, ask questions. You can drop questions there in the Zoom Q&A feature, and I will make sure Dan reads them out. By way of intros, my name is Ethan. I work on product here at WireMock, and we've got Dan Perovich, who leads our customer success here at WireMock, and he's going to walk you through today's session of WireMock Live. Today's session is request matching beyond the basics. If you're not familiar with WireMock Live itself, WireMock Live is a series we do just about monthly where we go deep on any particular capability related to WireMock and API mocking. We rotate the topics, so it's great to join every month. And these things are really, really useful, honestly, even if you're not using WireMock, because they really ground you in ways you can think about API mocking on top of the WireMock feature set itself. So we're going to share this recording out with you after. You can share with your colleagues. And we'd also like feedback. So we'll drop our emails here in the chat. You can get in touch with us after the fact. We're happy to pick this up in one-on-one conversations with you or your team. And as far as questions go, and as far as follow-ups go as well, don't feel like you have to limit it to exactly what Dan is showing here. WireMock Live is a series about WireMock, so we've got our topic, which is going to be the request matching, but we're happy to take any other related questions that come up along the way. All right, so thanks again for joining, and with that, I will hand it over to Dan, and we will get started. I think you are muted there, Dan.
I turned on my video and started talking without turning on my audio. So hello, everybody. Thank you, Ethan. Let me get my screen shared here and we'll get going with today's topic. All right, so going to just walk through a few different capabilities of WireMock inside of WireMock Cloud here, specific to request matching. Oftentimes we stick to some basic request matching capabilities, and one of the very powerful features of WireMock Cloud is the very flexible request matching engine. And not only is it flexible, but also very powerful. So in this first stub that I've loaded up here is really just an example of a simple, pretty standard matching approach where we're really only looking at the method of the request coming in, as well as matching a very static path here. And this is often where most of our customers start. It's actually the default is path and query. So if we were to hard code a query in here, such as color equals red, all of these pieces would need to match specifically in order for this stub to respond. And this can become, quite cumbersome because it leads to a rather large number of stubs being generated inside of your mock API, which means more for you to maintain in the long run. So we're going to cover some of the more specific, more detailed, more powerful matching examples here, just scratching the surface on these with the limited amount of time that we have. Of course, we have WireMock Academy available at wiremock.io/academy, which covers some of these in more detail. And as Ethan shared earlier, we can take a deep dive into any of these as follow-ups if need be. So I'm going to come down here and we'll take a look at our next example here. One that's often overlooked, especially in our blank template when you create a new mock API, is the path regular expression. So path regular expression, you'll notice here in the URL match type, we're going to specify a path regular expression here and then configure a regular expression to match on that thing ID in the path. In this example, any thing ID between 1 and 5 digits long, 0 to 9. So you can get as creative as you want with these path regular expressions. One thing I will point out is because WireMock Cloud is built on top of the WireMock open source engine, which is natively written in Java, You'll want to make sure that any tools that you use when building out regular expressions in any part of WireMock Cloud, that you are using the Java libraries. A tool I often like to use for regular expression building and testing is this regex101.com. And as an example, you'll notice that they have a flavor section in which I make sure to choose Java 8 in order to match the underlying libraries that WireMock is using itself. So when we switch to an approach like this, right, we move away from static stubbing and then can really start to unlock the capabilities using dynamic response templating inside of WireMock, which we'll see some examples as we move forward a little bit. The next one I want to cover is the path template. Again, often overlooked, especially, and this is what I meant to show when I said in the blank style of template when we create a new mock API and choose blank template style, is that we can mix open API standard conventions in the blank template. We don't necessarily need to use the open API template when creating a new mock API. We still have access to the concept of path parameters. So simply by choosing in our URL match type a path template, we now get an extra button that's enabled for us inside of our advanced matching capabilities for the path template. A path template in the Open API standard is defined using these single curly braces and then naming that particular path parameter value. And then we can make use of our matching logic by clicking match, the match for the path parameter. It's auto-populated here for thing ID. And then, of course, using all of the advanced capabilities of how WireMock should look at this thing ID in order to determine if this is a match. Now, in this case, you'll see that we are defining a dynamic response template here for this path. For this response. And you'll notice that because I'm using a path parameter and a path template, that I can use the actual name that is specified in the URL, such as thing ID. If we weren't using a path parameter, the typical way we would access something on the path would be using the index, the zero-based index of the path to retrieve that value of the thing ID. But because we are using a path parameter, it now becomes a named object, which we can reference directly using its name. Okay, our next example for our number 4 here is using the logical and and or operators. This feature was added within the last 6 or 7 months, I believe. I'm losing track of time. But this has been put into WireMock Cloud UI, and it allows you to build very complex matching logic. So in this example, we're looking at a path of v2/thing and a thing ID, like we saw before. But in this case, we're going to use a query parameter lookup for a color value. And we're going to use the AND operator here. And we're saying that the color can contain red, but it can't contain the word light. And if that's the case, of course, it'll come down here and we'll be able to print out that information, recalling using dynamic response templating, the query parameter called color. So to see this in action, I'll simply open up our test requester here, and we can see that if I send red in here, that we get our successful match. And if I send light red, we can see that this stub is no longer matched, because if you remember, we had a negative constraint on the does not contain light. So we're getting our helpful 404 not found with our closest stub logic, alerting us to the fact that, hey, this looks a lot like the number 4 logical and or operators stub, but it's not, because the query does not match. It contained light red, and we can see in our message here that it's an and statement, and it should not contain the word light anywhere in there. And you'll notice that these can be pretty much combined indefinitely to create multiple pieces here. We can even stack these if we needed to, adding some ors in between. So the world is your oyster here, and building out that complex logic as you need using the and or operators. Another feature that we've added, over the last, half a year to year is the date and time matchers as well. So in this example, again, we're hitting the same endpoint using a path template. Now we're going to look at a date header being passed in on the request and making use of the before argument here, and then configuring that and saying that the date needs to come in. The actual date will be passed in an ISO 8061 format, but it needs to be before the date of 7/18, which is today. So if we were to pull this up, it pre-populated that for me. Thank you, test requester. And we can see that that comes in successfully. But if we put something that is not before 7/18, which would be 7/18 is not before, again, we can see that this request will not match. Now, the configuration inside of the date settings is quite verbose. You'll notice that we can do absolute comparisons. In this case, we're looking for an absolute and expected absolute date, 7/18, no time coming in. And on the actual side, we'll see that this is ISO 8061 format. And you'll notice the other formats that will natively understand, even a custom format if you wanted to define a custom format using Java standards. Inside of here, you'll also notice that there's relatives. So if we wanted to look at some offsets as well, you have the availability to define offsets on the dates, the offset units ranging from seconds up to years for the time and date stamps, as well as truncation, right? Some complex truncation here, first minute of the hour, first day of the year, first day of the month, right? So on and so forth, as you see in the list here. So a lot of complexity built into the particular date and time matching function. Again, very often overlooked inside of WireMock Cloud. Two more examples for us here in request matching beyond the basics. So, for specifically post bodies, right, we have some additional capabilities that are quite powerful. You'll notice in this case, we're just using a body matcher and equals to JSON. And quite often, users will simply paste their information down in here and overlook the two arguments, or three that are here, as we'll demonstrate all three of these, ignoring array order and ignoring extra elements. So this comes in really useful, especially with arrays when we don't really need to don't want to have to determine what particular order the array is going to come in. And maybe we don't care about any additional attributes that are inside of this object. We can certainly ignore those as well. So to see that happening in real time, of course, this is going to match as we configure it. But if we take our white and maybe move that to the end and send this, we should still get a successful match down below. And even if we go ahead and add an extra element, such as socks, let's add quantity, a quantity of 4, and we send this, we can see that our stub is still matching. Whereas if we were to turn off ignoring extra elements, and we try that one more time, we go ahead and add our quantity back and send that up. We can now see that we are getting the body matches JSON. So where did I goof up in my live demonstration here? I didn't click save. That's probably what I did. So let's make sure that that's what it was. Otherwise, Ethan and I have some work to do as soon as we get off this call. Let's see. Okay. So what are we matching here? We're matching on 7. I see what's happening. So notice that we're actually matching on number 7 up top here. So we have our body matches a JSON schema. So my fault. I've set up my demonstration in a way that triggers them successfully here. So let me show 7 here, and we can loop back to that and figure out what's going on. This one, in our last example for number 8 here, uses, again, path template, but now we're going to make use of matches a JSON schema. In this case, we can see that the JSON schema here is set to path template for 5, and it needs to match this particular JSON schema. So we can see we're going to define a JSON schema here of what the request needs to look like. And if we come up into our test requester, we can see that my schema is currently blank. So another helpful tool I'll point out here is a tool such as JSONSchemaLint.com, which allows us to provide a JSON schema and then a valid or test a request body against it. So if I simply copy this particular request here and we try that out inside of here, save the config, send this, we can see that number 7 body matches the schema. Now, if we go ahead and change something in our request here, such as the must equal this value, and we send it, we can see that we now get our invalid request here. So what our schema was defining, in this case, showing a lot of different concepts that are available in a JSON schema, such as defining constants for a particular value, such as bar, must be equal to the value. This is what we violated by turning it into values. So this is also a very helpful way of making sure that requests coming in match a particular schema. And of course, this could be coupled with additional matching properties, such as maybe adding a second body and using maybe matches JSON path, and then using a JSON path such as thing name being equal to socks, as we often did that there. So you can couple these and stack these as needed to, again, arrive at that very powerful matching criteria that makes sure you return the response or the stub that you need. Of course, these concepts, in request matching, we also have data source matching and stateful matching. Stateful matching recently renamed from scenarios, as many of you longtime users might have remembered scenarios. Scenarios are still available, but if we just release dynamic state, you'll be hearing a lot more from us in the coming days on this new incredible powerful feature. And in fact, our next WireMock live session will be specifically on dynamic state and maintaining key value pairs in memory for your mock APIs and the power that that unlocks. But both of these are also considered advanced matching criteria, in which we'll cover state in our next session, and data sources was covered in a prior session, maybe 2 sessions ago, 2 months ago. With that, I'm going to bite my tongue for a couple minutes here, see if we have any questions that were asked during the time here, and ask my MC, Mr. Ethan, if he's got anything for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on this briefly, and I know it's a great plug for joining the next one that we will go deeper on stateful mocking. But are you able to talk a little bit quickly here on how I might slice up as a user when to think about request matching versus stateful mocking versus scenarios? Just kind of like, what is the model I might follow for how to stack those things up?
Yeah, great question. So I would say usually much earlier in the SDLC, we're just going to rely on very simpler matching, right? So maybe unit testing, we're usually dealing with individual transactions and not complex data scenarios where state needs to be maintained. We're making calls to individual functions or methods and just need a simple response back. But when we start thinking about being able to chain together multiple requests, where request number 1 will have an impact on the request number 2's response. A great example of that is maybe the status of an application. When an application is posted, it goes to a processing state, and then we need to maintain that state and understand when does it change, right? When a reviewer reviews that application and either denies it or accepts it, that status changes. So if we want to get the status of that application, we'll want to maintain something like a state. Now, the difference, the question around further building on that, when do we use scenarios versus using the dynamic state or stateful mocking? Are again, I would say very early in the life cycle in non-shared environments where a stub's being used by an individual user, and we're not going to have potential of clashing on data scenarios where two users are trying to use the same account ID or credit card number or application ID. Scenarios will usually be good enough for that time. But when we get later and start going into integration environments where multiple users are testing in that environment, or maybe sandboxes where we're offering sandboxes to our customers, whether they're internal customers or external customers, the likelihood of multiple partners or customers using the same account ID while they're developing and testing is rather high. That's when we'll want to start making use of dynamic state. And in the next session, we'll go through a couple of examples, detailed examples, including maintaining balances for account numbers, as well as a shopping basket example of being able to maintain items inside of a shopping cart and interact with those by removing them and adding them and querying that shopping basket. Those are all great use cases in those shared environments, later stage environments, where dynamic stateful mocking would be most useful.
Awesome, thank you. And we do have time for a couple other questions, so if anyone hasn't dropped in your questions yet, please go ahead and do in the Zoom Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and read this question we just got in, and then we've got a couple others waiting as well. So we say, I'm new to WireMock. We've seen matching and predefined responses. Can I also do matching if there is no match? If there is no match, relay the request to a different or real endpoint. Is that what proxying is? Question mark.
That is an amazing question. So the answer is absolutely yes, 100%. So as an example here, and we do have a WireMock Academy video specifically on blending live API with mock responses that I will call out and we'll point to in a minute. But I've just created a new mock here, and I like to call this one as the example of forwarder. And what we can actually set up in our matching logic, instead of picking a specific method here, we can say any method will do. And one of the capabilities under advanced in our URL match type is any URL. So now we've effectively created a stub that's going to respond to anything. Now, a couple of things we need to do to actually make this behave the way we'd expect is make use of WireMock's priority configuration. So the way WireMock works is every request that comes into our endpoint is evaluated against each and every stub in the list, determining if one or more match. If zero match, we see the custom 404 messages that we saw during today's session. If one matches, obviously it will be picked. If two or more match, then the priority will be evaluated. Priorities are set between 1 and 10 currently in WireMock Cloud, with 1 being the highest priority. So you can call this P0 priority, and 10 being the lowest priority. So if I were to set this to a 1, and all these other ones, which are defaulted to 5, remain at 5, then this forwarder will always respond, and none of the other stubs will ever be used to be responded. And like you asked in your question, in our response, we can set up the proxy and decide to send this on to our live base URL. Maybe we're using api.github.com and click save. With this configuration, I would expect that every transaction that is sent into this mock API endpoint is now being forwarded on to api.github.com. But if we wanted to actually blend both our mock responses with our live system responses, you can set this to 10. It's lowest priority. So that means anything with a higher priority that matches our request coming in will be chosen as the response going back. But if there is no other valid match in here, forwarder will always match. It'll match everything. And because it's the lowest priority, it will respond by proxying the request on to the real endpoint and then sending that response back through to our consumer.
Awesome. Great question. We are at time, but we're going to go over a few minutes here to make sure we get through all the questions. So we've got another one for you, Dan. Can I combine the examples you've shown? For example, regex with pattern matching.
That's a good question. So I will say yes, and there's a little bit to unpack in that question because it has me thinking, pattern matching and regular expression matching are really the same thing. Regex is a form of pattern matching, so I need a little bit more clarity on the keyword pattern in that sense. But it has me thinking, was that a was that a blending of path template with regex or something different? Now I'll answer with, if we use path template, then my understanding right now, and I'd have to test this to verify, is that the regular expression supplied in here would be considered a literal. So that necessarily would not work as we'd intended. But you can still do a path regular expression here. And, in the case of being able to blend the both together, there's really might not be a need for that, because if we're doing something like this, we can represent this 10 like I showed before as a regular expression where we can say up to 2 digits or 2 digits there, right? So maybe 1 to 2 digits there. And that is actually mimicking the same thing as using a path template in this case. Or in fact, if we were to and I'm gonna blank on my regular expression here. So let's come over into our path regular expression, and we can say 1 or more. So it would be just the plus sign, it looks like. So 1 or more of something. So we can say 0 through 9 plus. This would be the equivalent of using the path templating there. Now the only difference, because we're not using path template, there is no name for this. So we in dynamic response templating would need to refer to that by its ID, right? Its index. So thing would be the 0 index, and then this ID as part of the regular expression would be the second index, or the number 1, right? So request.path.1 would retrieve this particular value for us.
And you actually already addressed it, Dan, but you were kind of spot on. So they clarified they meant path matching rather than pattern matching.
Awesome.
So,
great.
But you got ahead of that one. Cool. One last question here, and then I think we can wrap up. Although if you didn't get your questions in, follow up. The emails are in the chat. We're happy to do some sidebar one-on-one calls, whatever makes sense for your team. The final question I would ask is, you showed earlier a potential conflict kind of between the response matching and other stubs. Can you just kind of talk through what risks might be there, or how prioritization might work in cases like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there was some funkiness going in with my body equals example here, of which, I certainly don't want to live debug on our time here. But the way I would actually go about trying to figure out why, when I was posting to this, trying to demonstrate the enabling and disabling of ignore extra elements in array order, and it seemed to be returning the one above, right, which was something that I wasn't expecting and wasn't happening yesterday. My first instinct is to look at the priorities, make sure the priorities were matching there. But then a very helpful way of debugging these sorts of things is making sure to lean on the request log capabilities in WireMock Cloud. So coming into the request log, I can see all the various posts here, and I realize I use some pretty basic endpoints here, so they all look a little bit confusing and trying to figure out which one was the one that wasn't the right one. We can see by clicking through these for this particular request that was sent in, who sent it in, what was the request body that came in, and then what was the stub that was actually chosen to be matched here. So when we were using the test responder, we simply only saw this piece of information being shown in the test requester body. But now coming into here, I can actually see the body matches JSON schema was the stub was chosen as the matching here. And this is definitely not expected as to what's going on here. In fact, just to be completely frank with everyone on the call, I don't think that matches the schema as at all. So this is definitely a follow-up that I will be taking with Ethan and our product team to figure out what's going on. And I will call out that our help team, our engineering team, customer success, product team, everybody is all hands on deck for our customers. So even if this is not enough information to figure out, well, why is this responding? It shouldn't be that case. You always have access to this blue chat bubble down below. This is live chat with one or more WireMock experts. You'll notice right now that I'm currently listed on call for here, as well as some people from our sales team, and our lead engineer, in fact, is actually helping to triage any requests, questions, or potential issues that are coming in. So please, please, please make sure you make full use of the chat bubble here in product help to reach out to us at any time if you get stuck on something like I'm personally stuck in. And it happens in software, right? And that's the fun part to software is challenging issues and being a sleuth to figure out what's going on. Right. I hope that answered the question there, Ethan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really good shout that we love to get on and work through these things together. We try to make the product as simple as possible at all times, but APIs sometimes can only get so simple depending on your use cases, and that's where we're always here to help. And I think with that, we will wrap up. Like I said, if you have any follow-up questions, we will... Actually, we just got one in right at the buzzer here, so if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and take it. Can we update request matching and then relay to the endpoint? So JSON has a market segment to corporation. After the match, it becomes market segment to retail.
Okay, can we update the request on matching and then relay to the endpoint? Let's say the JSON has, so the post body has the first piece there, and then think the way I'm interpreting the question is, can the response actually have a different answer? Well, absolutely, right? That I would say that is would just be a static response. So even though the request post body had market segment of corp, then the response body has market segment of retail. But I'm not sure that that's actually what is being asked here. I have a feeling that a second request coming in to the same endpoint might need to look at retail the second time around, while the first time it was corp. So if that is the true interpretation here, because it looks like after the match it becomes this, we'd have to dive a little bit deeper. The capability should be in there, but I wanted to understand the use case a little bit more. This might warrant a little bit of a deep dive on your use case to understand what you're trying to do there, because we could handle this potentially with JSONUnit, placeholders, with regular expression matching. We could also handle this with scenarios, or for the most complex use cases, we could track that market segment as a state, as a key value pair in our new stateful mocking engine, again, which we'll be covering in our next WireMock live session. So this one probably warrants a follow-up question. Feel free to reach out to us either via support or the emails that was posted by Ryan in our chat there. You'll also find that helpful link for our Cloud Academy at wiremock.io/academy in the chat box. Oh, you're on mute there, Ethan.
I was just copying you from the start here, Dan.
Perfect. That's a ready to wrap it up.
With that, we will go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you all so much for joining. Please get in touch if we can help with anything, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have a good day.